The town that I lived in has developed a lot since this story. But when this happened, there was a lot of factories spread out with lots of land in between them. There was a Walmart being built in the area, but it had barely started construction. There was a main highway that ran through there, but my mom didn't like taking it as much as traffic would get bad most of the time. The side streets we would take were desolate and not much light. There was also little to no cars taking these streets. I can't remember where we were coming from that night, but in the car that night was my mom, my brother, who is 3 years younger than me, and myself. My mom is obviously driving, I'm in the passenger seat, and my brother is sitting behind me. My mom is the sweetest person ever, but is very adamant that she will never stop to help somebody on the side of the road or pick somebody up, especially when her kids were in the car. She does, however, make sure that she calls the police so they can help. It was around 9 p.m. and we were going home when my mom and I spot someone on the side of the road by the passenger's side with their hood up. Nothing out of the ordinary, as my mom slows down a little since it is dark outside and doesn't want to harm anybody that might be fixing their car. As soon as we are close to the car, this guy steps out from around the hood of the car towards the street and is waving us down. I don't remember much of a description because I wasn't paying much attention. Plus, I could barely see the man, but I do remember feeling bad that we weren't at least going to stop to see what he needed. The man at this point is in the middle of the road waving his hands, but as we come up to the car, we don't see anybody else in the car. So my mom swerves around him and tells my brother to find her phone and her purse that was on the floor between the front and back seats. I look at my mom and she looks in her rearview mirror and her face goes white and her eyes get wide. My mom slams her foot on the accelerator. This is highly unusual for my mom, as she is really good at going the speed limit. At this point, I know something is wrong. My mom's voice goes high and in a panicked voice is asking my brother where her phone is. I'm yelling at her what's going on. All this chaos is freaking my brother out. With him being so little, he's crying and can't find the phone. My mom keeps her eyes on the road but keeps glancing up continuously at her rearview mirror and finally answers, "He's following us." I'm not sure what she was talking about, but know that this isn't a good situation. My mom is speeding towards the highway and thank goodness there's no traffic. I look in the back window and see somebody passing cars trying to keep up with my mother. I ask her where she's going and she told me that she's heading to the police station. As we are getting close, my mom tells me to jump out of the car as soon as she stops the car and grab my brother from the back seat while she runs around the car to meet us. My mom stops right in front of the police station and doesn't even wait for the car to fully come to a stop before she puts the car in park. I open my car door as fast as I can and grab my brother, who has quickly opened his door. I take off in a full sprint with my brother in one hand and my mom on the other hand. Once we finally talk to a police officer is when I finally understand the full extent of what happened. My mom told the police officer that once we had passed the guy with the broke-down car, he quickly ran to the hood of his car and slammed it. He then got into his car and sped after us. That was when my mom knew that this guy had horrible intentions for us. She said he kept trying to speed up to get on the side of us, but she was able to speed up to avoid that. Once my mom turned toward the police station, she said the guy had stopped following. She gave the best description of the guy in his car, but because everything happened so fast, she didn't get a license plate number. I'm pretty sure the police never found him. I'm also not sure what the guy had planned for us if we had actually stopped to help, but I know that it was nothing good. It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances, my housemate and landlord Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was odd, but I really needed a place to stay, and, well, people have their little quirks, so I just chalked it up to that at the time. As I got to know Mike and our cohabitation continued, I learned more about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, that he used meth. Now, I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He was probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job, enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that when he would be around the house, drinking and using meth, he would start to run off at the mouth. He would often joke that if I smelled lye coming from the basement, not to think anything of it. I think it was probably the third time he said this that I asked why he keeps saying that, and he responds, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a wily grin on his face. I tried to chalk that up to a bad sense of humor, but it didn't sit right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know of my coming and going and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off of work, because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or his bedroom. Other days he would play very loud music that bumped through the whole house. Sometimes he would even play NPR talk radio at those volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about certain ladies of the night, saying, "You can do whatever you want. You can choke them or beat them to death, and nobody cares." I took exception to this. I told him I thought that was messed up, but when he got tweaking, he'd always come back around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about how he was a normal white guy who owned a house and had a good career, so the police would never suspect him. At this point, I started to think that it had gone too far to simply be a joke. I was in a weird position because money was tight at the time and my options were few. I tried to convince myself that even if he is messed up, he's probably just engaging in some sort of outward fanaticism. I knew that he would acquire these services from certain women on occasion, but again, didn't judge that activity at face value, but started becoming concerned. And then at one point when I was doing laundry, I caught whiffs of decomposition. The house we were in was in southeast Portland. It was relatively new. Having grown up in upstate New York, I know that animals can be trapped in walls and die, but this was the garage and there were no animals scurrying in the walls. This was strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what I do and decided that I would confront him about the smell. I decided to poise the question in somewhat of a suggestive way by expanding on his jokes. I told him that he needs to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smelled decomposition from the garage. I'll never forget his reaction. His eyes widened and he shot me a sharp glare, somewhere between fear and anger. He stumbled over his words and eventually responded, "What? Really?" I said yes, really, and there was a few seconds of awkwardness before he said, "Thanks for letting me know," and promptly went into his bedroom and shut the door. A few days after that, he went into the upper crawl space in the garage while I was again doing laundry. He called for me and was trying to convince me to come up into the crawl space. My body locked up and it was like my instincts were screaming at me that if I went up there, I would not come back down. I gave some excuse that I can sparsely remember that I had to be someplace, packed up my laundry, threw it in my room, and left. He spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob. The only way in was through the backyard, and I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect to either confirm or dismiss the suspicions once and for all. In the last couple of months I had lived there, I was privy to more graphic comments about women and certain workers and explicit talk of intimate violence, and he was using more and more. He once showed me a video that he made. He is a graphic designer and artist as well, which featured heavy bondage themes interspersed with distorted audio of women screaming and this strange, leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of these things alone may be innocuous, but as they accumulated, it became suspicious to me. It was October of 2016 that I left there, taking off to Ochete Oyate camp during the anti-pipeline protests with Standing Rock Lakota. A mix of feeling called to action and having nothing to lose, as I wanted to get out of that house in the worst way. My last night there, I didn't give notice that I was leaving. He was drinking and tweaking again. started in the same conversation, loosely describing murder and violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. I told him that he would get caught eventually, not even holding back my suspicion anymore. He reiterated that he was the last person police would suspect and asserted that they wouldn't catch him. He said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense that he had been using before. I left the next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year and a half. I felt as though I hadn't done anything. The guilt was eating away at me, so I called Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip describing what I had described here. When I did, the operator started going back and forth, putting me on hold because the call had piqued the interest of the police sergeant who was assigned to the call center, so they were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, his house, the methods he described, etc. It seemed like they took interest. I gave them as much information as I could remember and left it at that, feeling just a little bit better that I had at least tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times. I told my mother all about this, and she became interested, asking what house this was, and she ended up pulling it up on Google Maps. She pulled up the street view, and I noticed that there was a large enclosed trailer in the driveway that wasn't there when I was. I could theorize why it might have been there, but could not put together a practical reason for it, or why I'd be using it, unless he was moving or using it to haul things to discard. Admittedly, this is pure conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder. I doubt that I will get closure or have my suspicions validated unless he does finally get caught and arrested, and I read about it. I have grown up poor and been around the low life a lot. I've interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my time, but none of them have ever made the impression that Mike made on me. Make of it what you will, but I hope I never meet him again. I'm sure a lot of you already know this as it's made its rounds in the news, but a few days ago on October 7th, 2020, there was an FBI raid on a trailer in Michigan. The story takes place the night of the raid, around 7:30 p.m. My boyfriend was at home sleeping when I came home from work at 6:45. I drove in our neighborhood and turned down the street to our house. All seemed normal as I go inside the house to rouse my sleeping boyfriend, and we prepare to gather our things to go shopping. It takes me a little while to wake him up, and we chat for a bit about my day. As we go to leave our house to go shopping, we're continuing a conversation we were having as we step out onto our front porch. I noticed then that we're much louder than the outside, and noticed that there were people standing on the end of the road. I stop mid-sentence, and it's then that I realize how eerily quiet it is aside from my boyfriend who was still talking, unaware something was off. I quickly tap his shoulder and try to draw his attention from locking our door to people gathering in the street. We both look around, and I then notice a police car at the other end of the street, just barely in view. There were two officers speaking to some men beside their large SUV. The SUV was a state car that was parked somewhat sideways, so it was blocking the road, but it had its lights off. I took this as a sign that some mild neighborhood scuffle had occurred and someone called the police. A noteworthy thing, but not too uncommon for a mobile home park. We proceeded to our car, and I commented, somewhat irritated, that they better move the police car soon, as they were really blocking the traffic. As we made our way out of our driveway, another car turned down our street and headed up towards the police car. This gave us the confidence we needed as sheep to follow someone else towards the confrontation. As we slowly crawled up the streets in our car, we watched the car in front of us stop and turn at a road that had been left unblocked just in front of the police. We moved to this area somewhat recently and haven't learned the entire ins and outs of every street in the park yet. Unfortunately, this street was a dead end. As we rounded the corner on the dead-end street, I caught a glimpse of the police, and my irritation immediately melted into confusion and fear when I noticed the large assault rifles that they were carrying. It dawned on me as we made our way toward the end of the road that whatever the police were doing, they weren't here because of some small neighborhood fight. I felt my anxiety rising as I started rambling about how they had guns and why would they have such massive guns outside our house? We turned the car around, and as we came back up on the police blockade, they silently motioned for us to go back down towards our house. We did, but eager to still leave our neighborhood and also hopefully find out what was going on, we passed our house and turned down a different road to try going around. At this time, we thought it was weird that there was a cop car with no lights on but heavily armed officers standing by around it, but we didn't think that there would be any more, and we were wrong. As we rounded the street, we were immediately greeted by another police car and 2 more armed men, this time in full military uniform with lights flashing. I think my jaw dropped to the floor as the men started towards our car. I started really freaking out at this point and told my boyfriend to turn around and to get us out of there. As we turned around, I noticed out the passenger window that there was someone in handcuffs by the side of the house. He was looking right at us, and I felt sick. When we turned around, we finally found a road that led us out of the park and onto the main road. We got to the grocery store and recounted what had just happened on our trip to go grocery shopping. It took me a full hour to finally stop shaking and process what had happened. We thought it was crazy, but assumed it was probably some kind of high-profile drug raid. We found out the next day when the news broke that there were multiple people arrested in a thwarted plot to kidnap our state governor. The raid had taken place approximately 15 to 30 minutes before we left our house, and our idiot selves had no idea. The second time we pulled up to the police blockade, it was right outside the house the raid had taken place at. It really made me stop and reconsider everything that had happened that night and how suspicious we probably came across. I now have to come to terms with the fact that I lived down the street from domestic terrorists, or at least their house, since I assume it's still in their name right now. I've made a point of figuring out multiple routes through our neighborhood because I realize how dangerous that could be in a more immediate emergency. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if they weren't stopped, and how much crazier that altercation could have been just down the street. Before my mom married my dad, she dated a man named Craig. At first he was sweet, but he slowly became abusive. My mom tried to leave multiple times, but Craig always threatened her. After one violent argument, my mom waited and fled in the middle of the night. Years passed, and she got married and had me. My dad's work included a lot of traveling, so it was mostly my mom and I alone in our big acreage home. My mom was in the kitchen making lasagna while I was sitting in my high chair. It was extremely hot that day, so she opened the kitchen door to let in some air. She heard heavy footsteps enter the kitchen behind her. My excited mom assumed it was my dad, and she turned around with a, "Hello, my love." Her excitement immediately turned to horror. There was Craig, standing in the middle of our kitchen with a gun visibly tucked in his pants. Craig smiled at her and asked her what she was making. My mom mustered enough courage to say lasagna. She was physically shaking as Craig sat himself down beside me. He playfully pinched my cheeks, and I guess I laughed at him. My mom was holding back tears as she finally asked what he was doing in the house. Craig said he just wanted to visit my mom and he would leave when he was done eating. When the lasagna was ready, she served it to him. My mom took me and sat across from Craig so she could keep an eye on him. Craig said that he still had her things at his house and she was welcome to get them. My mom said she didn't need any of it and he could throw it out. Craig started to get agitated and said she threw him away like garbage too. Craig said that she was acting tough, but he knew deep down inside that she was still the stupid girl that he had dated. Craig claimed that my mom needed him in her life and that she couldn't function if he wasn't there to help her. He said he needed to be there to raise me because my dad was an idiot who would never be able to protect my mom or I. Craig said if he was crazy, he could have easily kidnapped us or done things to my mom because my dad was such a weak individual who couldn't protect what was his. My mom started to cry and told Craig to leave the house. Craig said it wasn't her house and that he had the right to be there. My mom said if he didn't leave, she would call the police, which made him really angry. Craig threatened if the cops got involved, he would hire men to cut her up into pieces and film it. My mom started to cry even louder, and an agitated Craig threw his plate and yelled at her to stop crying and that he loved her. I got scared and started to cry too, which caused Craig to stand up and approach my mother. She jumped out of her chair with me cradled in her arms. She begged for Craig to spare my life. Craig tried to reach over to touch my mom, but she got so scared that she fell to the floor, sobbing. The phone began to ring, and Craig became so overwhelmed that he ran out of the house. The cops and his family found him about to shoot himself in the head. His adult son had to convince him not to do it. My mom was so traumatized that she didn't want to deal with any of it, so she got a restraining order against him. Her and my dad moved across the country. I was curious and searched this guy up and was shocked to see that he was dating a college-age girl who looked just like the woman he couldn't have. I was with my parents visiting Florida on a road trip because my dad did a business trip there once a year. Because he would be there for a week, we'd take as much of an opportunity as we could to sightsee around Orlando while we had the chance. On a day my dad had off of work, we went into a gift shop just to browse through some stuff, and we all separated between the shelves. I thought I saw my dad in my peripheral vision while looking at something I found particularly cool, so I walked over to him, still looking at the object in my hands. When I was right in front of him, I said, "Look at this, Daddy. Isn't this cool?" And then looked up to find this was a complete stranger. I immediately got extremely awkward and shy and started to apologize, looking around for my actual dad. Then this guy leans down towards me and says, "I can be your daddy, if you want me to be." My mom immediately flew around the shelf and grabbed my arm to yank me away from the man, then started telling him to stay away from her daughter. He backed away pretty quickly and left the store without saying anything else. I honestly just thought at that age that this guy was trying to actually be my new father, but my mom explained to me years later what really happened. I honestly just hope he never actually got a hold of a kid. So I'm a 13-year-old male, and I live somewhere in Alabama with my family. My dog Boomer has some good genes in his blood, so he is a good dog. He's a Doberman mixed with some sort of hound, so he has good guard dog genes in him and a hunting dog. So Boomer had different sounds for different things. He has a whiny bark for when he needs something. He has his kind of deepish bark that's the equivalent to, "Hey, what's that?" Then he has his aggressive bark when the thing he's barking at gets too close. And then there's the ghost howl, a chilling howl when he finds something. So I'm inside reading some stories on Reddit when I hear Boomer switching between his whiny bark and his deep bark. I go outside to check on him because he might be stuck and or sees a dog. So I go outside and Boomer is looking at the area behind him while pacing back and forth while looking at me in a field area. I get closer to Boomer and his ears go back and the fur on his lower back stand up and he starts barking aggressively. When I stupidly get too close to find out what he's barking at, and when I got out of Boomer's chain length, a man lunges at me and at a reflex I jerk backwards back to Boomer. Boomer barks some more, but the guy doesn't get the hint and keeps coming at me. Boomer barks a final time before jumping up and biting on his arm. The man screams in pain, alerting my grandma, who looks out the kitchen window and sees everything that's happening. She immediately calls the police while my grandpa comes outside with his gun ready. The man kicked my dog and ran off into the night. The police never found the man, but he knows if he comes back he's going to get bit and possibly shot. Who knows what would have happened if Boomer wasn't my guard dog. Three years ago, in October in Minnesota, I just started dating my now wife. I was obsessed with working out and asked her if she would like to use one of my guest passes at the YMCA. She begrudgingly agreed and we started heading to the closest YMCA near her house. We were about a couple of miles away from the gym, with my wife driving south on the busy street, when I noticed on the other side of the road heading north, a woman was walking on the sidewalk while holding something. Next to her, driving slowly on the shoulder of the road, was an F-350. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I shuddered after seeing them. My whole body had goosebumps. I told my wife that she needed to do a U-turn so that we could see what was going on. We did the U-turn and got behind the F-350. I noticed immediately that the woman was barefoot and holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. I got out of the car and told my wife to stay in the car and to call the police if anything happened. When I started walking towards the woman, the first thing I noticed was that she was barefoot. With it being October in Minnesota, the temperature was around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, so no one would be walking around without shoes and socks on. When I got closer to her, I saw the baby was only wearing a diaper wrapped in a thin blanket. As I got closer, I could hear the guy in the truck yelling at the woman to please get in the truck. Get in the truck now. I finally reached the woman and asked her if she was okay and if she needed help. She said yes, and the guy wouldn't leave her alone. Right then, a different woman started jogging past. I forgot my phone in the car, so I asked the woman jogging if she had a cell phone and if she could call the police, which she did immediately. I turned around to face the truck, and I see the man getting out. As he is walking towards us, he is now pleading with the woman to get in his truck. I positioned myself between him and the woman, and he stopped when he was about 3 feet away from me. I told him that he wasn't going to come any closer and that the police were on their way. Now, while the guy stopped walking towards us, he completely ignored me and didn't acknowledge what I just said. And this is where the story gets a little weird. The two of them start having a conversation that made zero sense with me standing between them. He said, "Honey, just get back in the truck and come home." She responds, "You kicked me out and told me to leave." He says, "No, I didn't. I came upstairs and you and the baby were gone." And she responds, "You never let me leave, and never let me do anything, and never let me spend any of our money." And he responds, "We don't have any money. Our credit cards are maxed out. You don't have any shoes on, and our baby's cold. Please, let's just go home." She yelled at him, "I'm never coming home with you. You don't let us do anything ever." At this point, 2 police cars showed up with 4 cops. 1 cop spoke with the man and 1 with the woman, and the other 2 cops took statements from both me and the jogger. I'm not sure what took place that day with the couple and the baby. I stepped in because I had automatically assumed that some sort of abuse was taking place where the woman was trying to escape him. Maybe that's what was happening, or maybe the woman was having a mental breakdown. I'll never know. Either way, it was one of the strangest 10 minutes of my life. I moved a lot growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times and was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in a band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating, although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I had a kind of bad home life, and I spent as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until about 6 or 7 at night with this friend group. 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had gone home already. I just thought he was being a gentleman. He mentioned something from a previous move when he lived in California. He didn't walk a friend home and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home. We got a lot closer after that. We bonded over both living in California and exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I just wanted to help. A few months later, he tried asking me out. It was this big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang it to me in the cafeteria. But I was already dating someone, and when I turned him down, he got angry. A freaky, quiet, twitchy kind of angry. I felt so bad. I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends, we still hang out in groups, but I would pass him on the street walking somewhere, and a few minutes later I'd see that he'd changed directions and had started to follow me. He would walk me to classes by following me in passing period at a distance. I started to minimize the group time that we spent together, and he would follow me more. I had friends meet at each class and walk me to the next one because I felt unsafe, and he knew where I lived. Then he started to talk. Not to me, but to mutual friends about the one girl in California who we tried to walk home. At first, she just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes, and every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. And then he said what happened. Over literal weeks, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home, and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, my birthday as well, and she died horribly, and he couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who had brown curly hair, blue eyes, my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy with his sick fantasy about my death would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive, mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure that he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at school or in our little town walking home from school in the dark. One day at school, he had a breakdown, freaked out, and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him, and I found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure that he was okay. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from mutual friends with added details. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley, and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone. I didn't have anything else on me, and he thought that I was calling the cops. He stabbed me once, twice, again and again, and Sam stood there horrified. He saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked the homeless man. He killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was a fantasy or real. I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first, and that morning we went and told them everything. The stalking, the stories, how he admitted to murder, and that was the reason they moved from California. How I was afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. The counselor didn't take us seriously, though. She went to the principal, and the principal, not a mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusations. The principal then informed me that he didn't think that Sam had any kind of mental illness or that I was in any danger, and that was that. I lost faith in adults, gave up on going to the police. I stayed with my friend, walking me between classes, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend and looking behind me every step of my walk home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now. And I would think it's made up if it weren't for my journal entries recording the events and my growing panic and the similar stories from my friend group. My twin sister and I used to hike in the Northern California woods alone as we grew up. It wasn't a big deal then. We knew where we were most of the time and how to get back home from any point on the mountain range. One super cold morning when we were around 10 years old, we woke up before our parents and got dressed to go for a hike. I remember getting as far as the stairs on the deck of our house before I froze. I couldn't speak or move. I looked at my twin, who had gotten as far as the middle of our driveway, and we locked eyes. She read all over my face that I was terrified. I didn't feel anything, though. I just knew something was wrong and we were in danger. She bolted back inside, and I followed her once she moved past me. Upstairs was a window that faced this big detached garage on our property. We looked up at it without saying a single word to each other the entire time, and that's when we saw a giant mountain lion circling the garage. It was in a hunting stance, sort of squatting down and walking very lightly. I think it was hunting our cat, Rascal. Our parents didn't believe us when we told them what happened, but the same reaction happened to me twice more since. Once more at the same house, but it was a huge family of deer. The third time I was in college, and a rabid raccoon was sitting outside my car door at my apartment when I was in the passenger seat. I haven't felt this since, and it's been 15 years, and all 3 times I never saw a thing. It was all instinct. Always trust. A warning from nature. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.